Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome back Gail Miller. She is a life and wellness coach and a maternal-fetal medicine physician. Her KevinMD article, which we'll talk about today, is titled Childlessness. Your patients and colleagues may be grieving silently. Gail, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, we'll get into your article in a little bit, but for those who didn't listen to our first episode together last fall, just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Sure. So I am a maternal fetal medicine physician and a life coach, and my clients are women who are childless not by choice. I'm also a TEDx speaker, and that my message there was about childlessness and grief. I became a life coach because I found so much benefit from life coaching myself
Hmm.
because of my own journey with childlessness. What I found is there is a lack of therapists and coaches who really understood this, who really understood infertility. It doesn't mean that you have to go through this yourself to understand, but it certainly is helpful. And I found coaches and therapists who just really had a lack of understanding and some inappropriate comments and recommendations. And so I decided this is what I need to do. And that's what I set out to do, become a life coach to help other women who are involuntarily childless.
And you talk more about this in your Kevin MD article. And you mentioned a lack of understanding, not just among the general community, but even among therapists and other life coaches as well. So tell us, and you could talk about more about this when you talk about your article. What are some of the biggest misperceptions? What are some of the things that you want us to understand about childlessness?
So the biggest misconception is that this is something you can't grieve. It's really common to be told you can't miss what you never had.
Hmm.
Well, in reality, you can, and that is called disenfranchised grief.
So have
Um,
therapists or people, have they actually told you that?
Yes. Yes. And I have clients, I've had patients who, they are pregnant, but they've gone through fertility issues or they've had miscarriages and they're told one that, they'll hear comments about miscarriages. Well, at least it was early.
Hmm.
Okay. It doesn't matter. It's still painful. It's still a loss. And then they've been told things like, but it's not a person. Like unless it's someone you can touch and feel, they can't understand. And so that is just a big misconception that this is something, well, it didn't happen. So, it's not a human you lost. So you can't feel grief. And you absolutely can.
So tell us some of the stories that you've heard in terms of the emotions, just to help us understand. No one can certainly understand what exactly, you or your clients are going through, but just give us a sense of some of the emotions that are in play here.
Yeah. So the biggest thing is it's a loss of a future that you'd planned. And it's not just women and men who are childless that go through this. Parents who have a child with an illness, a chronic illness, you've imagined your future with this child, and now that future is gone.
Mhm.
And you grieve that future, even though your child is there. And it's the same for someone who is childless. You've imagined that future even if you never got pregnant. The minute you want to have a child, you've imagined
Yeah,
everything,
yeah.
down
Mm.
to, their wedding that you're going to, everything. And now you don't have that. So it is grief over the loss of the future. And then similar for anybody going through infertility treatments, you're grieving that natural conception that is supposed to be so easy, but it's not.
Mm.
And so there are so many emotions that come with this that are only now being recognized. And it's also, it is something that is common among our colleagues, infertility and childlessness, and we don't realize it's going on because there's such shame and stigma attached to this that people don't want to talk about it.
Tell us some of the stigma. What are some of the reasons why people don't want to talk about this?
So we get messages all the time, that motherhood is the most important job you can have. And so if you're someone who's struggling to become a mother, you're going through dealing with infertility, or you're someone who's beyond that and at the point where you will never have children, you start to think, well, that's the most important job in the world, and I can't do that. Then what's wrong with me? What does that
Hmm.
say about me? There's also this assumptions that are made about anyone who's childless, but more commonly with women, more so than men, which is that you must be selfish.
Mm,
So first I want to say, for anyone who chooses not to have children, they are not selfish. They are making a personal decision. And for someone who wanted to have children but can't, it's also, we're not selfish. There's accusations all that you didn't try hard enough. There's always options. Well, there aren't always options. There are comments made, well, for people who have gone through IVF and didn't get pregnant and made the decision to stop. Well, you gave up. I have one, she's not a client, it was a story that I heard in a group from someone who, she went to a physician, that it was a plastic surgeon, so it wasn't related in any way to her
hmm.
fertility, but somehow it came up that she doesn't have children. And she said, well, my husband and I went through IVF for 3 years and we've taken a break. And the response from the physician was, oh, I have a friend who's been going through IVF for 10 years. You're early in this, don't give up. And it was like, okay, there are so many physical, emotional, financial
Yeah,
struggles when it comes to IVF, and to tell someone, don't give up, you're minimizing what they've gone through. You're telling
sure.
them something that's not really true. Nobody walks in anybody else's shoes. So to say don't give up, and you're early in this, is really, invalidating what they've gone through and the grief they're experiencing.
So tell us some of the other high points in your article where you talk about this. It's titled Childlessness, Your Patients and Colleagues May Be Grieving Silently.
Yeah. So I think even my clients even will recognize, I mean, we're all familiar that some of our emotional, psychological struggles manifest in physical ways. And I've had many women who are like, I know my fatigue is because I'm anxious, or I'm sad, I'm grieving, or
Yeah,
whatever. They will tell you this, but they don't want to bring it up with a physician. And physicians often, when you have 10 minutes to
yeah,
address, a whole host of problems, or even just one, it's hard often to recognize that maybe there's some underlying emotional issue that needs to be addressed. And particularly in women, not just older women, but
yeah.
even women younger, 30s, 40s, who know, they've had a hysterectomy or whatever, they're at the point where they realize they won't have children. There's also a fear underlying that, and that is the fear of growing old with no one to take care of you. Not that anybody should have a child or children to
Yeah,
take care of you when you're older. And we all know there are seniors who have children who don't take care of them.
yeah,
But this is a known, you won't have anybody. And it's an underlying fear that again can manifest in physical symptoms. So just a quick, hey, is there something, about your fertility status? Is it a sensitive issue? Is there in any way something you want to talk about? Maybe a great segue into just, and then you don't have to delve into this. Nobody's asking you to counsel these
yeah.
women. It's, here are some resources that are available.
Tell us some positive interactions that you've seen from your coaching, just to give us a scenario, say in primary care. I'm in primary care and this scenario may come up. What are some positive scenarios that you've seen in coaching on how to address this properly?
Really just having a sensitivity and recognizing the words. We say words matter. And so recognizing that, asking someone, how is this a sensitive issue for it, rather than just kind of delving in,
Okay.
is really, and then if they say yes, how can I help? What resources do you need? And that's very simple, doesn't take a whole lot of time. And then you have the recognition, well, they need this help, and also that maybe these physical symptoms are as a result of what the underlying grief that they're experiencing.
Now, let me ask from the other side, because I've talked to a lot of healthcare professionals on the show about their infertility journey or their childlessness experience. What are some things that they can do? What are some resources that they could turn to help them through that experience or journey?
Yeah, so there are a whole host of support groups. Where I would start is with Resolve, which is a national organization that has support groups for people dealing with infertility,
Okay.
as well as they're now adding in some more focus about childlessness when you've reached that point where this is not going to happen. There are, in addition to me being a life coach for women who are childless not by choice, there are other support coaches. There is Fertility Found. She's a physician, Dr. Kate Chandler, who's
Okay.
a physician. There is a support group for women who are both single and childless, not by choice. So those are just a few of them. I do have a list of, there's also religious organizations, and I have a list. So if anybody would like help with the resources, please reach out to me.
And in terms of breaking that stigma, especially among medical professionals, addressing this issue in a non-judgmental way, what are some ways that we can break that stigma?
First is to kind of look at what your thoughts are on it. If you are thinking, anybody can get pregnant, or that someone who is childless, whether they're dealing with infertility now or they're past that point, think that thought that someone who's childless is selfish. I would
Hmm.
start with that. I would start with the assumptions that you make of people who are childless, because you need to, in order to break down that barrier or that stigma, we have to change our thoughts about it and not make assumptions. You didn't try hard enough. So the first step is to really step back and think about, what do I think about this? What are my assumptions?
We're talking to Gail Miller. She's a life and wellness coach and a maternal-fetal medicine physician. Her KevinMD article is titled "Childlessness: Your Patients and Colleagues May Be Grieving Silently." Gail, tell us some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience.
My take home message, the biggest one, is to recognize that your patients and your colleagues are really suffering from this grief with infertility and childlessness, but you may not realize it because it is a hidden grief, and that it does get manifested in physical symptoms. So it's just a very quick and easy. If you see someone who doesn't have children, and a simple solution is to just address it as, is this something that's sensitive for you? And if they tell you yes, then that may be an issue for them. If it's someone who has chosen to be child free, they're going to say no, and that's great. You move on.
Gail, thank you so much for sharing your story time and insight. Thanks again for coming back on the show.
And thanks for having me.